To the outside world, he was a law student, a devoted friend, and a loving family man.
He cooked big dinners, talked and laughed, listened to music and drank wine.
He went to church and took part in the church discussions. He was just very normal.
She called him my prince. She said he was extremely charming.
But below the surface lurked something darker.
Looking into his eyes, you could see the evil.
He confessed to 30 homicides, but law enforcement believes that number is way higher than that.
Being a serial killer is terrifying enough. He was sadistic.
Textbook psychopath.
His superpower was being plain and blending into virtually every situation.
Ted Bundy was different than what we thought a serial killer should look like. He was charming, good-looking, well-educated, ambitious, and he seemed like the boy next door.
What drove Ted Bundy's insatiable appetite?
This is a guy that truly loved murder.
How did he get away with it for so long?
There weren't surveillance cameras on every corner. DNA was not as sophisticated. Women just went missing.
Were there any signs?
If you have a friend and then you find out he's actually a murderer, that turns your stomach. And that doesn't go away. I'm 73 and I still feel that way.
And how has Bundy made us reconsider the evil hiding in our midst?
He was that different. He was an invisible monster who was amongst us. The devil incarnate you'd like to have as your company.
Ted Bundy's upbringing is kind of the stuff of legend.
Ted Bundy's mom, Eleanor Louise Cowell, got pregnant with him when she was 22, and she was not married. Her family was extremely religious, and they were deeply embarrassed and humiliated by this. So they sent her away to a place for unwedded mothers to have the baby.
Once Louise had recovered, she intended to go home and leave Ted for adoption. And her father said, no, you're bringing him home. And so she brought Teddy home with her in Philadelphia.
The real reason for the family's concern may be much darker.
It's rumored that Ted's grandfather is his biological father, that he had actually raped Ted's mother, and he was the product of that rape.
After she moved back with her family, they decided that Ted would be told that his mother was actually his sister and that his grandparents were his mom and dad. And so for the majority of his upbringing, that is what he believed.
If anyone in the family asked about who Ted's father was, his grandfather became instantly irate, and he would launch into these just violent outbursts.
It was a very abusive, destructive household. His grandfather was known to have a violent temper. There's stories about him, abusing the grandmother, throwing her down a flight of stairs. It was just a very unstable, very sad, very scary environment for Ted to grow up.
When a child is brought up in these type of traumatizing environments, it is really hard to walk away unscathed.
When Ted was growing up, he showed signs of being very brilliant, but he also showed some disturbing signs. There was an incident where one of his aunts was babysitting him, and she ended up taking a nap. And when she had woken up, he had placed knives around her body while she was asleep.
There is something very, very wrong with toddler Ted Bundy, and nobody really knows what to do about it.
Eventually, the young Ted comes to believe his grandparents are too old to be his parents, and that his 24-year-old alleged sister, Louise, is actually his mother. But he still doesn't know who the father is.
I don't think Ted ever felt stable, and that starts from birth. Rejected, doesn't feel like he belongs.
Eventually, Ted's mom found the courage and the strength to leave the family. In 1950, she took Ted and they moved to Tacoma, Washington, where she met a man who was an Army cook with the last name Bundy.
Over the next decade, Ted's mother and stepfather expand the Bundy brood, welcoming 4 children by the time Ted is a teenager. The additional kids only further alienate the eldest son.
He was described as a loner. He was described as somebody who didn't really fit in. He couldn't do the things that other kids could do. He wasn't good at sports. He just couldn't really measure up. By and large, his childhood was very lonely. He just lacked the ability to sort of have that human connection with people.
To compensate, a teenage Ted develops a vivid fantasy life, fueled by his obsession with lurid pulp magazines.
On the cover of these magazines, they would have like these large-breasted women with a knife to their throat by a man, or he's about to strangle her. It was the threat of violence mixed with sexuality.
Back then, true crime magazines were also near pornography magazines, and the two were conflated sometimes. And I think that did play a role into some of the sexual deviance that Ted later developed.
His fantasy was to watch a woman be assaulted.
The darkness inside Ted is growing.
Even at a young age, Ted knew that something was off, something was wrong. Ted admitted later in life that he used alcohol and marijuana to sort of numb his darker fantasies.
We showed an early predilection towards deviance. Some kids want to go out at night and hang out with their friends. He wanted to go out at night and peep in people's windows.
Then one night, Ted can no longer control himself.
As he's walking home, drunk, he comes up behind a woman without thinking at all. He grabs a stick and runs up behind her and clubs her over the head. She drops to the ground, and he runs away.
Part of me wonders if this is him testing the waters, seeing what it feels like to actually hurt somebody. Ted gets to see somebody scared, and maybe he starts to realize that he likes it a little bit.
Bundy is never linked to the attack, and in 1965 graduates high school, ready to begin his next chapter. He attends the nearby University of Puget Sound for his first year of college, then transfers to the University of Washington. It's there he meets the woman who will change his life forever, Diane Edwards.
Diane came from a really wealthy family. She was beautiful, she was brilliant.
The two befriended one another over a mutual love of skiing, and eventually they managed to work the friendship into a relationship. They fall in love. He looks like a wonderful suitor to her family, and I think for him, she was the be-all, end-all, the absolute prize.
He seems to really love status, and she's a point of status for him.
But he put her on such a pedestal, he let his academics slide.
Now, Diane sees him as somebody who doesn't really seem serious about school. He's failing classes, he's not going to classes. And so ultimately, she decides to break up with him because that's not the kind of guy she seems like she wants to have a future with.
This really set a fire in him. And that amount of rejection really hurt him, probably more than any amount of physical pain. So I think that this really triggered the vengeance in him.
A year will pass before a devastated Bundy tries his hand at romance again. In the fall of 1969, he meets Marilyn Chino and her friend Liz Klepfer at a bar in Seattle.
I was about 20 feet away, and I saw this man. He had a yellow shirt on. He was kind of nursing a beer and like staring into space. And to be perfectly honest with you, I've never seen that look before on anybody. It was a real different look.
Liz is taken with the mysterious man.
she ended up dancing with him. And then we all decided we would go home. And I went with another friend, and then she took her Volkswagen and took Ted with her.
The pair soon become inseparable.
He was really in love with her. She was a single mother. She had a young daughter. And Ted sort of like swoops in and becomes sort of everything she needs. The partner for Liz, the father to the daughter. And from the outside, they look like they have this very typical, very normal sort of all-American family.
She called him my prince. He got along with her daughter. He basically took on the role of the perfect partner, taking the little girl for walks, throwing birthday parties. He would wake up early on Saturday mornings and cook breakfast for her while Liz slept in.
Liz is offering Ted a touch of normalcy and open, unrestricted love that Ted has never felt before. Not from his mother, not from his grandparents, and that's scary.
Ted's new relationship inspires other facets of his life as well. In 1970, he re-enrolls to the University of Washington to finish his degree in psychology.
He actually was getting his act together to appear as the partner that Diane originally wanted. When she said he had no ambition, he went off and got his degree and said, look, I graduated, and almost made it sound like he did it all for Diane. Meanwhile, he was dating Liz.
The next year, Ted puts his psychology studies to use and begins working as a counselor at a suicide hotline.
He told me that when he was a phone answerer for a suicide hotline in Seattle, that he always had his best luck with young women who wanted to kill themselves, that he was very good with them.
I think it ties into his need to feel like he controls life and death, to tap into that God complex. Every day, somebody else's life is in his hands. It's interesting that Ted would be so good at talking to people who are in their darkest hour. It's almost like that's where he lives, in that dark place.
He went into those areas to understand and learn the different ways that he could interact with people to gain their confidence, gain their trust.
Ted also develops a special interest in law enforcement.
He's working on the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Commission. And this job gives him insight into how police handle crimes, what the blind spots are. He's able to see how the jurisdictions don't talk to each other.
He learned some interesting things, useful things if you're thinking about becoming a serial killer.
Eager to expand his knowledge of the criminal justice system, Ted enrolls in law school at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma in the fall of 1973.
He was attending classes at night. I'm sure he was busy with Liz during the day, but they would work out their times where they would do stuff together. He was burning the candle at both ends. He only attended law school, perhaps only 3 classes during that first semester.
Ted can't seem to keep his focus on school.
That breakup with Diane, I think, was really the last straw.
That desire to kill was rising and building within Ted. It would completely break loose. And that's when the transformation was complete.
By early 1974, Ted Bundy can no longer contain the darkness festering inside him. He drops out of law school and finds a new focus.
He's looking at women who he might potentially hurt one day.
You're full of adrenaline. You want to kill. The last thing you want to do is sit in a classroom.
On January 4th, 1974, Ted Bundy creeps his way into the basement apartment of a University of Washington student named Karen Sparks.
He quite likely saw her when he was out peeping in windows, because that was what he was doing in those days.
The sleeping 18-year-old UW dance student has no comprehension of the evil about to be inflicted upon her.
He takes a metal rod from her bed and bludgeons her with it. And then sexually assaults her with the same pole.
When Bundy hears sounds from the room next door, he flees. But the damage is done. Bundy has claimed his first new victim in a decade.
What a lot of people don't realize is that guys like Ted Bundy don't snap. This is not a one day you have a bad day and you do a horrible thing. Every moment of his life up to this moment where he attacks Karen Sparks, it's all been coming to this moment.
He's finally doing what he's wanted to do for years. He's not gonna hold back. It's gonna be messy, it's gonna be bloody, it's gonna be impulsive. And, he's going to enjoy it.
The beating was so severe that it left her in a coma for 10 days. And while she did survive, she suffers permanent damage.
After the attack, Ted seamlessly returns to his normal life with his girlfriend, Liz.
Liz doesn't know this, but Liz is perfectly safe right now because he let out all those horrible feelings onto his victim. He's not going to hurt her now. Ted can keep it separate. He can go back to Liz. He can enjoy what he has with her, but he also has to keep hunting for the new high. He has to find another victim.
4 weeks pass, and Ted can no longer contain the evil within. He returns to the University of Washington to satiate his needs. His next target is 21-year-old senior Linda Ann Healy.
The front door was unlocked. So he came in the wee hours of the morning, went down the basement steps, and he went into the first bedroom, and that was the bedroom of Linda Ann Healy.
Bundy then chokes Healy unconscious. But her nightmare has just begun.
He takes her nightgown off, he hangs up in the closet. He makes the bed, he grabs the red book bag and puts some of her clothes in it.
He changes her into her street clothes and he leaves and takes her with him.
I think that MO changed because he learned something the first time around. You can see the development of the intellect he's putting into how am I going to do this? It's very calculated.
Bundy takes the unconscious co-ed an hour southeast to the remote Taylor Mountain, where he secretly rapes her. Then, for the first time, murders his victim as well. Reports of Linda's disappearance are big news. Many locals know her from her daily radio weather reports.
Because she was the ski report announcer, she was known, at least by name, to a lot of people in the Seattle area. The public started taking notice in these cases. Linda Ann Healy was sort of everyone's daughter. She was a very wholesome person. A lot of co-eds began to worry. If something had happened to Linda, maybe something could happen to me.
They have no idea the nightmare is just beginning.
Over the period of the next 4 months, there were several women who went missing.
Only this time, there are witnesses. At the time of Susan Rancourt's disappearance, police receive reports of a man on campus with a cast on his arm.
They describe him as slim build, good looking, arm in a sling, saying he's been seen walking around asking people for help. Nobody helped him, but they're wondering, could this be connected to the Rancourt disappearance?
Because Bundy has a new angle.
Ted Bundy played to the vulnerabilities of people and made himself look as if he were weak and couldn't possibly hurt someone, either by being on crutches or having a fake cast on his arm.
At this point, Bundy's MO has changed. He's now trying to lure these women to him.
He studied human psychology. He knew how to con others, and he used all of these tools against his victims to trick them. He knew how to behave as if he were a normal, civilized person on the surface for a couple of minutes, and then he would attack.
Like Linda and Donna before her, Bundy takes Susan to the remote Taylor Mountain to rape, torture, and murder the 18-year-old. Then return to her body again and again.
Being a serial killer is terrifying enough. He also was into necrophilia, which is just really proof of how he needed to control these women. He hated women.
With the necrophilia, they can't fight him off. He's got the ultimate power there, ultimate control. They cannot say no. Which is kind of like Diane. She was exactly what he wanted, but was rejected.
And Bundy isn't finished. Perhaps sensing the heat is on, he crosses state lines to Oregon.
A young woman from Oregon State University, which is in Corvallis, quite a distance south of Seattle, was out one night walking across campus and never seen again.
Kathy Parks was going to have coffee with friends. Again, there's a man in a cast asking for help.
So all those cases are coming together, and law enforcement is extremely concerned about this. Who is or who are these predators that are targeting young women on college campuses?
Authorities have no idea who the killer is or that he's evolving.
He got a little braver and started attacking women and kidnapping them while they were out doing things. So it just really shows how he was ramping up in his crimes.
One thing remains the same: his hunger for fresh kills and his taste in victims.
They're college age, attractive white women with their hair parted down the middle.
Liz had that very same haircut. And one day she told Ted that she was thinking of cutting her hair short, and he lost it. He really, really didn't want her to change her hair.
While Ted spends his nights trolling for his next victim, during the day, he's a hardworking law student and dutiful boyfriend.
He was basically on a monthly cycle of committing these murders. He'd see Liz, he'd do whatever he was doing, trying to maintain an outward, normal life just to keep any authorities at bay.
Like so many serial killers, he was just completely capable of turning it on and off and compartmentalizing those things, and was able to live multiple lives all at the same time. He cooked big dinners, talked and laughed, and listened to music and drank wine.
I think that emboldened him even more, and it also added to the thrill because it's a secret he had that no one knew.
Liz was mesmerized with him. In her eyes, he was so good. She was always, I'm gonna find my prince and get married, and she found him in Ted.
But Bundy's emotional firewall is beginning to show cracks.
Liz started to see his sexual desires change. He was asking her to have anal sex, which she didn't want to have. He was morphing into that altered personality, that realm of murder, into the place where only the women that he killed would ever see it. It's like a Jekyll and Hyde thing.
But Bundy will soon make a potentially fatal mistake. By the spring of 1974, law enforcement in the Pacific Northwest is no closer to identifying the man who has raped and murdered 5 women in as many months.
The fact that these women had gone missing and were not found was really key, in the sense that in the majority of homicides, there is, quote, a body there. That's very unusual because it's not an easy thing to do, to kill someone and then dispose of their body.
Then, 1 month after Kathy Parks' disappearance at Oregon State University, Bundy returns to his usual hunting grounds just outside Seattle. It's last call at the Flame Tavern. and recent community college enrollee, 22-year-old Brenda Ball, is looking for a ride home.
She went out onto a very busy, dark highway and began hitchhiking.
Brenda Ball is last seen approached by a man in a cast asking for help. After that, she simply disappeared.
The MO is emerging that it's beautiful women with long brown hair parted down the middle, and they're being approached by someone who pretends to be in need, who then takes advantage of them.
This new type of predator sends shockwaves through the community.
There definitely isn't as much suspicion. In the 70s, there was no reason to fear people. People did let their kids walk blocks alone, like kindergartners. People really did keep their doors unlocked. People just didn't know that this guy was the scary guy to be afraid of.
10 days later, Bundy continues pushing the envelope. It's midnight when he approaches co-ed Georgianne Hawkins in the alley directly behind her UW sorority house.
Ted Bundy was an evil planner. He really thought about how he was going to lure his next victim in, and he found a pattern that worked for him.
He's trolling back and forth the alleyway with crutches and a cast.
Georgianne's walking down the alleyway and she sees him and she says, "Oh, can I help you?" And he says, "Oh, if you could help me get to my car, it's just over here." And as she's helping him get his stuff into the car, he reaches for his tire iron.
He hit her with such force that both of her earrings came off and she came out of one of her shoes. He knocks her out, puts her in the car. He drives, maybe 15, 20 minutes away, and soon after that strangled her to death.
Georgianne Hawkins was last seen Monday evening shortly after midnight. Police believe she went along this route and then somewhere she disappeared.
Once again, investigators scramble to connect the pieces.
There was very little information about who might have done these horrible crimes. There were no witnesses. There weren't surveillance cameras on every corner. People didn't have cell phones with cameras. DNA was not as sophisticated as it is now. Women just went missing. You didn't know what had happened and where to look for crime scene. There just wasn't a lot of evidence that you could go to.
But this time, Bundy does leave evidence behind. Georgianne's missing shoe and earring. And he realizes his mistake.
The next morning, Ted actually returned to the scene and he was able to actually collect the shoe and the earrings while investigators were still on the scene.
The brazenness of the killer returning to the scene of the crime to try to collect evidence is just mind-boggling.
Ted's definitely emboldened. I think that he, again, feels superior. He's done all of these things, but yet nobody suspects it.
But someone closer to home is beginning to suspect something is amiss with Ted. One afternoon, he and his girlfriend Liz are enjoying a rafting trip along the Yakima River when Ted suddenly changes.
Ted gets an itch to do this horrible thing he thinks about all the time.
Ted became moody. Liz is talking to him, but he's not doing a whole lot of talking. Suddenly, without warning, he pushes her into the cold waters of the Yakima.
He kept pushing her down in and wouldn't let her up. She said she was really, really scared.
When she comes up out of the water, she says his face is blank. I get the feeling he's not even seen me. And again, it takes him a moment to come around.
I wonder if this was that moment where the darkness kind of surfaced for a second and he realized he could do a lot of harm to somebody he ultimately really cared about.
Ted claims he was just joking, and all is forgiven. Liz asks if he wants to get together that coming weekend, but her devoted boyfriend has other plans.
In July of 1974, at a state park just east of Seattle, we see his most brazen attack yet.
Families are there, young people are there, sort of hanging out, enjoying the summer. And there's this man sort of wandering around. He's got his arm in a sling. He's looking beachy.
He's hunting prey with a million witnesses around.
After having perfected the ruse, he decides to take it up a notch and pick people up during the daytime at a crowded beach.
Around noon that day, Janice Ott, who was sunbathing, was approached by a man who asked for some help with his sailboat. He had his arm in a sling.
He's boldly telling people, "Hi, my name's Ted." Absolutely no fear anymore. He was bold, dude.
He understood that this mask of sanity, the normal Ted Bundy that he displayed.
Janice, a very personable young woman, went with him to help him.
Folks actually saw her drive away with him, and that was sadly the last time anyone heard from her, because he used the name Ted when introducing himself. In broad daylight, no disguises, so police were able to get a reasonable composite sketch. And there was also a description of his car, a Volkswagen Beetle, which some witnesses saw Janice drive off with him in that vehicle.
Janice was not reported missing until the next day.
Bundy's dark desire is too much to resist. Just hours later, he returns to the park looking for another victim.
Ted is a textbook psychopath, sexually deviant, power control serial killer. Someone who is a psychopath, they lack a conscience, they lack empathy. They are not able to connect to other people. They are driven only by their ego. They are very superficial in all of their relationships and everything that they strive for. They're charming a lot of the times. They're very criminally versatile, very callous, very narcissistic in a lot of ways, and they don't have a true identity of their own.
He meets another girl by the name of Denise Naslund, who was there with her boyfriend and 2 other people. She was last seen going into the women's room at outdoor facility there.
Within about 24 hours, it was quite clear that Denise and Janice had met the same individual, gone somewhere with him, and were never seen again. Later that year, Denise Naslund and Janice Ott's remains found in Issaquah, not all that far from Lake Sammamish Park.
Word of the new disappearances and the rumors behind them quickly spread.
There might have been foul play, but there really are no clues, no theories as to the disappearance of the 2 girls.
Police now realize these disappearances must be linked to the women who vanished earlier that year. They launch a task force to hunt the anonymous predator.
Because of my experience in investigating sex crimes and the often links between sex crimes and homicides, I was considered to be a pretty good person to be part of that team. Everyone was working together to try and find any connections between the women who had gone missing and possible suspects. These cases, they were involving young, attractive women. That's the kind of thing that gets a lot of media attention, of course.
So at this time, during the 70s, women are wearing less. They are not afraid to ask for what they want. Women were going to college more, pursuing higher education, and they felt more safe because they had choices. Ted Bundy threatened all of that. He was targeting women who wanted to be independent, who wanted to assert themselves sexually.
With literally thousands of witnesses, investigators begin developing a profile of their suspect. a man they believe named Ted, who is hunting women.
And remember, Ted didn't look unusual. He just looked like an average guy.
But Liz Klepfer believes she knows the man in the sketch the police are hunting.
With the disappearance of the Ott and the Naslin girls on the same day from the same state park came the first indications that a male subject was involved. His name was Ted, and he was very polite and suave.
Police used the media to spread the word about the Volkswagen Beetle Janice Ott is last seen driving away in, and share a composite sketch of the driver, a man known simply as Ted.
Ted looked like the everyman. He was good looking, but not too good looking. There wasn't anything about him that, really made him stand out. So he was memorable, but could also be forgettable.
Everyone thought they knew Ted or saw Ted, and he also happened to be driving one of the most popular cars of the time, which is this Volkswagen Beetle.
At that time in Washington State, there were close to 50,000 of those cars driving around. So it, again, just blended kind of into the background and didn't really register in a lot of people's minds.
As the news was showing all these missing women, I think Ted was really enjoying that. It was adding to that secret of, they're never gonna know it's me because, I'm this great person. They'll never suspect it.
But the sketch does catch the eye of someone who feels she knows the face. None other than Bundy's girlfriend, Liz Klepfer.
She brings the composite set, slams it down on the table, and I said, What is that? She says, who is that? I said, well, it's Ted, why? Then she burst into tears. I didn't want to think that of Ted. Goodness, he's a great guy. He's my friend's boyfriend. He wouldn't do stuff like that,
When Liz calls police to report the image resembles her boyfriend, she's met with skepticism.
When they looked at him and they found he was a law student, they said, look, we'll look into him. He just doesn't look like he's going to be our guy.
And the cops essentially talk her out of it. Your Ted is very upstanding. Don't worry about it. This isn't the one.
He made it onto a short list of 100 suspects, but because of his lack of a record and because of his civic engagement, they thought, well, it's probably not him. It's very unlikely.
But Liz still has her doubts.
One of the reasons Liz is having that feeling, that sort of dark feeling, is because she had also found things in his possession that are just kind of scary and unusual.
A bowl of keys, women's clothes, the plaster of Paris you would use to make a cast.
Again, Liz calls police. And again, they tell her there's nothing to worry about.
Police told Liz, we don't have time to take calls from girlfriends. If you want to make a report, you're going to need to come in. And at that time, she didn't do that.
She wanted somebody to reassure her that it wasn't Ted because of how much she cared about him. And because accepting that it is him would mean that she'd have to accept that their entire relationship was a lie.
As police continue combing through suspects, they anxiously wait for the killer to strike again.
We knew in the fall of 1974, when several months had passed without new cases in the Seattle area, that the person, for some reason, had stopped doing what he was doing. We just really didn't know what it meant.
Investigators have no idea that Bundy knows the noose is tightening and is already left for fresh hunting grounds.
Things are heating up with the investigation, and Ted decides he's going to transfer to the University of Utah Law School and take all of his first-year law school classes over.
He makes the move, and he gets to Utah and really does sort of establish a life for himself.
Including taking a new interest in the local Mormon church, where he meets Larry Anderson.
Ted was very outgoing and friendly and talked to the group, and when you're in a group, he would tell jokes and laugh at our jokes, and went to church and took part in the church discussions. He was just very normal. There's the best known picture of Bundy in Utah, and it's my personal friend, Carol, beautiful blonde parts her hair in the middle. He's washing dishes with her. That was in our house. And Carol thought he was a great guy.
Yet again, you see Ted Bundy fitting in, whether it's church, at law school, or in his new social circles. He's being the person everyone wants him to be.
He's blending right in, so no one thinks he could do anything bad. Utah is the perfect place for Ted Bundy.
I wonder if it gives him a bit of a thrill that he's sitting next to devout religious people, that he had really figured it out, how to wear the people mask.
We have to remember that people like Ted Bundy can have two sides because they can't be completely unbridled all of the time. They want to continue killing. And in order to do that, they learn to be calculating. And that's how they're able to get away with it for so long.
Within weeks, Bundy starts prowling around, looking for new victims to satisfy his hunger.
It's like a fresh start. He's able to freely succumb to those urges right away. Whereas in Washington, he would have to be more contained and controlled with the heat that was picking up there.
Within just a month's time in October, he killed 3 different women in a very short time span. So the victims were really ramping up, and he was escalating very quickly.
The evil inside Ted leads him to attack again and again. Yet he still keeps up appearances with his friends in Utah, even when the subject of the Seattle murders comes up.
They had just published the composite pictures of the Ted murderer. And we had taken this composite picture and we were holding it up to each other's face and laughing. It didn't look like me and it didn't look like Ted and the rest of us. So it was just a topic of conversation.
What normal person would hold up their own police sketch and make a joke about it? Nobody else would do that.
He's projecting what he thinks he should be to everyone around him. But I think that if you were to ask him to take off the mask, I don't think he even would know who he was.
But sometimes, Ted does lower his mask. Just a bit.
We were having a gourmet dinner at his apartment, and Ted explained how he felt a person could kidnap a girl, murder her, put her clothing in one county, her body in another, and that the police forces and the agencies would never connect all that together, and therefore a person could get away with these type of murders. And we didn't give it a second thought.
A week later, Ted makes his most audacious move yet when he abandons his mask entirely.
Carol Durant was at a shopping mall when a man approached her. He told her that he was an undercover police officer and that someone had tried to break into her car.
He asks, would she like to go with the officer to the car to see if anything had been stolen?
She asks for a badge, she flashes a badge, and they walk out to her car.
She sees her car, they open it up, nothing's wrong.
But the officer, who's really Ted Bundy, says, you know what, could you come down to the station and identify the guy?
They walk through the mall parking lot to his car, and she's a little surprised to see that it's a VW Bug and not a police car.
She thought, well, maybe he's just undercover, and got into his car, and they started heading off.
Carol Durant has no idea what she's just gotten herself into. But for the first time ever, neither does Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy, posing as a police officer, has tricked 18-year-old Carol Durant into climbing into his car at a Salt Lake City area mall.
She's expecting him to go straight and head to the Murray PD. Instead, he does a U-turn. She said, what are you doing? What are you doing?
The terrified teen realizes she's made a grave mistake.
So Carol decides she's gonna jump out of the moving car. She's taking her life into her own hands. She tries to open the door, and just when she does it, Bundy grabs her hand and is able to get a handcuff on it.
The other arm is free. So she's fighting him. She's literally fighting for her life. And she says that everything about him changed. His demeanor changed. He had black eyes. He was a total evil monster.
Carol forces her way out of the car and runs for safety. But Bundy is close behind.
He ran after her and tackled her, but she fought and managed to get away and ran until she saw a car, flagged them down, and just jumped into the car.
She is hysterical, and she's realizing that guy was trying to kill me and no one would ever know what happened to me.
Carol Durant was the first person that Ted tried to attack that was actually able to get away and give a description not only of who he was, but also how he acted and how he got her into his car.
She lives to tell the tale. She gives the cops information they didn't have. The woman is a hero.
But the police aren't able to act fast enough to stop Bundy from striking again. That very same night.
Once he got started, he wasn't able to stop. He couldn't even take a step back, reflect. Whoa, that was a close call. I could get caught any moment now. He instead went straight into, I'm gonna find another victim.
Ted still has the itch. He still needs to kill someone today.
This time, he sets his sights on easier prey. 17-year-old Debbie Kent, who is coming out of a high school play the next town over.
Bundy notices her. A number of people heard screams. One guy saw this Volkswagen just tearing out of there.
With Ted, he was all about baiting, and children were easily baited. So it was an easier prey, for lack of a better word.
After the play was over, when her parents went out into the parking lot and saw her car was still there, that's when they knew something was terribly wrong.
Police investigating the scene find a curious object in the parking lot, a handcuff key.
Later, when police heard about the Carol Durant abduction that same night, they were able to match that handcuff key to the handcuffs that Carol Durant had gotten away with.
This was the first time that Ted really messed up, and the investigators kind of got a break in the case.
Soon, word of Carol Durant's harrowing escape and the series of unexplained kidnappings in the area spreads, even reaching Ted's long-distance girlfriend, Liz Klepfer, back in Seattle.
She once again calls the police to tell them what she knows. And again, it goes nowhere.
And then just a few weeks later, Ted came to stay with her for Christmas and was completely unaware that his girlfriend had turned him in 3 different times and was pretty confident that he was a horrible murderer.
As 1974 comes to an end, Ted Bundy is on edge.
Now there's a sketch floating around of what the perpetrator looks like all around Salt Lake City, and the pressure was really mounting for Ted.
With his impulse to kill growing stronger day by day, and law enforcement in Utah now closing in, Bundy knows he must once again hit the road.
Ted and I had planned a ski trip to Colorado. He pulled up in his Volkswagen and he said, you know, I just need some time alone. Do you mind if I cancel and just go by myself? And I said, sure. And he drove off.
Larry has no idea Bundy's heading for new hunting grounds.
In January of 1975, with the pressure mounting on Ted in Utah, with these now connected abductions, as well as the link back to the Pacific Northwest, he moves his hunting ground to ski lodges in the Colorado area.
Colorado is great for Ted because there is a constant influx of new people coming into the towns where he's staying. And he can pretend to be this playboy hanging out in the clubs one night. The next day, he can pretend that he's a ski instructor.
It doesn't take Ted long to find a new target.
Karen Campbell was a nurse from Michigan, and she had flown in with her fiancé, Dr. Raymond Godowski.
The couple and Godowski's 2 kids are staying at a local ski lodge.
Bundy was there hunting. He was on crutches and fumbling with these snow boots. Karen Campbell spots him down there, and she asks him if he needs some help. He said yes.
He presents as somebody who is the vulnerable one. Because how could I be somebody that you should be afraid of? I'm injured. I can't do this by myself. I need help, so I'm not a threat to you.
Nobody thinks when you're on vacation with your family, let me just run back to the room for a minute. That's gonna be the last time you see them.
Karen's body is found in the snowpack a month later. By that spring, Bundy has moved from Aspen to Vail in pursuit of his next victim.
Part-time ski instructor Julie Cunningham decided she was gonna go meet some friends at a bar, but something happened between her leaving her house and getting to meet her friends.
Like Karen, Julie meets a seemingly helpless man on crutches, then disappears.
With the abductions happening in the Pacific Northwest and Utah, Colorado authorities thought that this might be somehow connected.
As authorities try to piece the puzzle together, back in Utah, Ted keeps up appearances.
Ted was almost a shapeshifter. If he was with politicians, then he was the political guy. If he was with his friends and cooking for them at home and playing Mozart, then he was the affable, charming host. It's all about keeping up appearances and the narrative he wants to tell.
But Bundy knows the authorities are closing in.
He's feeling the heat. So he expands his hunting ground to Idaho, and he drives way to Pocatello.
That's where the predator spots his youngest victim yet, Lynette Culver, just 12 years old.
Ted started to prey on younger victims. They're more naive, they're more gullible. They want to believe that people are good. They want to help others. And so younger victims are easier to trick and to fool. They're easier to catch.
The last time anyone saw Lynette Culver was at her junior high school, and she left to go on her lunch break.
8 weeks later, Bundy snatches another girl, 15-year-old Susan Curtis, from a youth conference at BYU back in Salt Lake. She is never seen again. Although Bundy spreads his crimes across several states to cover his tracks, he soon makes a fatal error close to home.
There's a cop, and he's sitting in his car kind of waiting for his shift to end. And he sees a VW Bug driving towards him and then past him, sort of weaving in and out of the lanes.
When he flashes his lights to approach the Beetle, it takes off. So he chases it. It eventually stops in an abandoned gas station. And Ted Bundy jumps out of the car, puts his hands up. He says, "Oh, there's a misunderstanding. I was just lost."
The officer became suspicious and asked to search the car.
Inside, he discovers numerous oddities.
The passenger seat missing, and there were what we would call burglary tools in the car. A crowbar and pantyhose with the eyes cut out.
A ski mask, an ice pick.
Torn pieces of sheet, coiled rope.
Things that most people don't carry in their cars.
The officer arrests Bundy, and word quickly gets around the police station.
It set off some alarms for some detectives that had been working the case because the VW Beetle was a red flag.
And that's when they realized that Ted fit the description of the person who tried to abduct Carol Durant.
I'm sitting in my office and I get a call, and Ted says, Larry, I'm in jail. So what do you mean you're in jail? He said, I'm in the county jail. I've been arrested. What were you arrested for? And they said, they think I'm the Ted murderer. And I laughed. I said, come on, Bundy, you gotta be kidding. And he said, no, and you're my call.
Ted's friend is incredulous.
He's innocent. They've made a mistake. I mean, how do you get a young lady to get into your car, you know, when you're a stranger? He was very outgoing, very friendly, very convincing. Never gave it another thought. Didn't even consider Ted Bundy, Ted murderer. I didn't connect the two. He didn't show any outward, gosh, I could be guilty. I mean, from my perspective, it just didn't show.
As Ted waits to post bail, police get a search warrant for his apartment. And what they discover stuns them.
In his apartment, they find all of these like pamphlets and brochures about ski resorts in Colorado.
There was a check mark next to the Wildwood Inn, which was the resort where Karen Campbell had been taken from. They also found literature referring to the high school play that was going on where Debbie Kent was taken from.
And that's not all.
When investigators found gas receipts that showed he was near the Wildwood Inn at the time that Karen Campbell had gone missing, I think they knew that they had found their person.
The pieces are really starting to fall in place for investigators. They're starting to really understand Ted Bundy is potentially the Ted from Utah, from Colorado, from Seattle that they've been looking for all this time.
Larry Anderson still can't believe the news.
I went to the state prison to visit Ted. We talked about, is there any chance you really did this?
It's then Ted lifts his mask ever so slightly.
He would say, well, if I was somebody that had done this, this is what I would have done. And then you look back and say, he was telling us how he did this. I never wrote Ted or visited him after that point.
But authorities still don't have enough to arrest Bundy and must release him on $15,000 bond. With Bundy now under investigation for murder in multiple states, police in Seattle finally reach out to his girlfriend, Liz Klepfer, to learn more.
We had many conversations with her. She was able to give us information about his patterns, cars he drove, things he would say, times when he would kind of go missing and she wouldn't know where he was.
Police have another ace up their sleeve. Carol Durant, the victim of the attempted shopping mall abduction outside Salt Lake City, and bring her in for a lineup with Ted Bundy.
The minute he walks into this lineup, Carol goes, that's the guy. And the cops are like, do you want to take another second? She goes, nope, I know my experience. I know what I remember. That's him.
Bundy knows he's in trouble.
With investigators closing in on him, Ted thought he was going to outsmart them by selling his VW Beetle.
The cops were way smarter. They do their legwork. They found out who he sells it to. They go and find the car. They do an incomplete investigation on it.
They find 3 hairs from Bundy's victims who don't live in the same state, who wouldn't know each other, and they're able to use this hair evidence to connect these cases.
You're a friend of Ted Bundy, and a phone call tells you the FBI has found body parts of the girls that were murdered in Colorado in Ted's car. Obviously, your mind changes immediately of, gosh, that's not a coincidence. He murdered them. Sickening. Absolutely sickening.
It looks like Bundy may finally face punishment for his litany of unspeakable crimes. But the prolific serial killer has other plans. Ted Bundy claims he's been wrongly accused of the brazen kidnapping attempt of Carol Durant.
Police there aren't willing to accept what I think they know, and they know that I didn't do these things.
He's released on $15,000 bail, paid by his parents to await trial. The news shocks Ted's friends in both Utah and the Pacific Northwest.
One of his friends in the church even said, "I wouldn't hesitate to set him up with my sister." Luckily, he didn't, because that probably would not have gone well.
Ted got out of jail in Salt Lake, okay, and he went right to Seattle. And you could not believe how many police cars followed him around completely everywhere they went.
Liz suspects her worst fears are confirmed.
My friend was acting really different. I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "I'm going out with Ted, so please, if he kills me or something, tell my parents."
Bundy is confident that he can be as convincing in the courtroom as he is with his friends. In February 1976, the trial begins. It takes just 4 days to decide Ted's fate.
The judge convicted him. And Ted was absolutely stunned by it. He did not believe it could happen.
He gets 1 to 30 years in prison, and off he goes to the clink.
Over the next year, prosecutors continue investigating Bundy for additional crimes. In February 1977, investigators gather enough evidence to have Bundy stand trial in Colorado for the murder of Karen Campbell.
Ted decides to represent himself in his own defense.
A benefit to Ted for being his own counsel was he didn't have to wear handcuffs or shackles. He was able to wear his own clothes. He was keeping up appearance, and he definitely took advantage of this.
He's given access to the law library in the courthouse on the 2nd floor. He's assigned a guard, but this guard takes smoke breaks.
Bundy found a bookcase in the room where the guards couldn't see him, and he used that opportunity to open the window and jump right out. And then he made off into the streets.
This is unbelievable.
Why didn't we have this guy locked up when he was upstairs in the courthouse? Why did the guard walk away?
You get a call. Have you read the news? Bundy, who we now know is guilty, escaped. And you go, you've got to be kidding.
We were contacted by the police immediately that he had escaped because one of the obvious things was he might go back to Seattle. We wanted to make sure that his girlfriend was protected. We wanted to make sure that the community was protected.
If we know anything about predatory behavior, when there's opportunity, they take it.
Even though Bundy is one of the most wanted men in America, he still continues pushing the envelope by hiding in plain sight.
Ted Bundy could be whatever the person he is talking to needs him to be. He can be a husband and a father. He can be a law school student. So he really was able to blend in anywhere he went.
Bundy was stopped when he was on the lam, and a rancher came up to him and said, "Listen, it's not safe being here, that Ted Bundy's out here somewhere."
Over the next 6 days, Bundy takes refuge in the woods near Aspen.
He was very malnourished at this point, had been out in the elements. He had lost a significant amount of weight.
Finally, he grows so desperate, he steals a car.
He's swerving all over the roads. When he gets pulled over, the trooper says, "Hello, Ted Bundy, you're coming with us."
Well, Ted was not content to remain behind bars.
With months to go before his trial begins, he plots his next escape.
He's in the jail cell, and he notices that there's a light fixture on the ceiling that is broken and it has yet to be fixed. But because of that, there's this opening in the ceiling.
He realizes if he can lose like 30 pounds, he can cut a hole in the ceiling big enough to squeeze his skinny little body out.
Using a hacksaw procured from another inmate, Bundy cuts a small hole in the ceiling.
It was December 30th, 1977, and most of the jailhouse staff was off on vacation, so Ted used this to his advantage.
He puts all of his books in his bed. He makes it look like someone's sleeping there.
Ted climbs through a ventilation shaft like it's Mission Impossible and drops down into a guard apartment that's empty. Steals the guard's clothes and walks out the door like he perfectly belongs there.
When he escaped, I'll never forget, I was scared because they said he was coming to Salt Lake. I remember one time I put a chest up against the back door.
Ted Bundy, he had nothing to lose. He was on the run again, and we believed once he was on the run, he would offend again. He would murder again. He would abduct again, and that's what happened.
After escaping from a Glenwood Springs, Colorado jail, Ted Bundy is a free man. But he knows his freedom is fleeting, and he needs to find new refuge.
Once Ted makes it out of the jail, he sort of crisscrosses the country. He takes buses, trains, planes. He ends up in places like Chicago, Michigan, Atlanta, and then finally he ends up in Florida.
After nearly 3 years since his last kill, Bundy now looks to release his demons in Florida.
By the time Ted gets down to Tallahassee, he knows this is likely his last chance to start killing again. This is the last hurrah. So he's gonna go out with a vengeance.
He heads back to familiar territory, a college campus brimming with vulnerable co-eds. On January 15, 1978, Bundy slips through an open door of the Chi Omega sorority house, wielding a heavy log.
Starting at about 2:45 a.m., he finds the room of Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy. He bludgeons both of them for strangling them with a nylon stocking. In another room, he attacks Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler, but a passing car scares him off before he's able to murder those women as well.
The night of the Chi Omega sorority attack, Ted is pure himself. This is 100% who he is, the darkest parts of him on display.
It was unbelievable. Tallahassee hadn't had what you call major murder investigation since 1966. We were in shock that this could happen. This had to be a stranger.
He's right. Sorority sister Nita Neary gets a good look at the attacker fleeing the house. Bundy's gotten sloppy.
Whereas before, his crimes were a little bit more planned and calculating, and he was leaving no witnesses, no evidence behind. Now with these rage-fueled attacks, he's leaving behind witnesses, survivors, and actual evidence, both forensic and physical evidence at the scene.
But Bundy's undeterred.
Ted Bundy continued down the street and attacked another FSU student, Cheryl Thomas, in her apartment.
And the attack is so loud that the neighbors hear it. They call the cops. It's enough commotion that it scares Bundy off.
When Ted climbs in through Cheryl Thomas's window, he's still amped up in that moment of hurting people and trying to get that rush. So he has to just keep going and keep going.
The 21-year-old student survives, but suffers lifelong injuries. After taking 24 victims across 6 states, the monster then simply vanishes. Nearly 4 weeks later, and 100 miles west, Bundy resurfaces outside Lake City Junior High.
Now, Bundy had been just kind of driving around the school, patrolling, see if anything would turn up. And sure enough, he sees this little girl walking.
12-year-old Kimberly Leach.
Ted's a hunter. He likes to bait his prey, but he can't bait women anymore. So when he sees this young girl, he can easily bait her by saying, hey, I know your dad, or I know your parents, you need to come with me.
Of course, she never got away from him.
He is just at pure perversion. And there is absolutely nothing you can do that is more horrible than what he did to Kimberly Leach. There's nothing worse than pedophilia.
She was missing for several weeks until authorities finally found her body near a hog pen around a state park.
Bundy has no idea that 12-year-old Kimberly will be his last victim.
On February 15th, 1978, around 1 a.m., Bundy is arrested at a routine traffic stop.
When the cop runs the plates, he realizes that the car is another VW Bug stolen.
Rather than declaring his innocence, Ted fought back and tried to go for the officer's gun. Finally, the officer subdued him by hitting Ted in the head with the butt of his gun.
When officers run Bundy's plates, they make a huge discovery.
Once police officers realize that the vehicle was stolen from the vicinity of the Chi Omega murders, they start questioning him about that crime.
At this point, he still refused to give up his name and refused to cooperate.
When Florida police finally get a match of the fingerprints, they're shocked to realize they've arrested one of the FBI's 10 most wanted.
We had confirmation that this was Ted Bundy.
Everything did fall in place. Once he was arrested in Florida, all the connections were made between Washington State, Colorado, Utah, and Florida.
We put him in a cell that was steel-lined and that had 3 locks on it. I put out a rule that the 3 keys had to be in the hands of 3 different correctional staff members. And if I ever found out that one person had all 3 keys, I would dismiss the whole shift.
The next week, Ted repeatedly reaches out from behind bars to the only lifeline he seemingly has left, his on and off again girlfriend back in Seattle, Liz Klepfer.
The date is 2/21/78. The time is 15:20 hours. This will be an interview with Elizabeth Klepfer. Are you aware that this interview is being taped?
Yes.
Is it taped with your approval?
Yes.
Later in her interview with investigators, Liz recalls those difficult conversations with the man she and her young daughter once loved.
We talked for about an hour. And he said that he was going to try to clear things up. He told me that he was sick and that he was consumed by something that he didn't understand and that he just couldn't contain it.
Did he mention why he couldn't contain it?
Well, he said that he tried. He said that it took so much of his time, that's why he wasn't doing well in law school, and that he couldn't seem to get his act together is because he spent so much time trying to maintain a normal life, and he just couldn't do it. He said that he was preoccupied with his force. I asked him if I somehow played a part in what had happened, and he said no, that for years before he even met me, he'd been fighting the same sickness, and that when it broke, we just happened to be together.
I wonder if Liz felt pity for him in that moment. I'm sure somewhere in there she still loved him. And Ted is telling Liz, I left because I was trying to protect you. Because the darkness was consuming me. A darkness that she wasn't even sure was there.
Now it appears Bundy may finally face justice for that darkness within.
What do we have here, Ken? Let's see. Oh, it's an indictment.
In the summer of 1979, Ted Bundy is about to stand trial for the Chi Omega sorority murders in Miami, Florida. Bundy's defense attorney, John Henry Brown, knows his client could get the death penalty and brokers a deal to save his life.
It was a plea bargain between Florida, Utah, Colorado, and Washington. And if he pled guilty in Florida to things we'd worked out, nobody would have asked for the death penalty. He finally signed the paperwork, and we're going to court in Tallahassee, and Ted turns around and looks at me and says, I'm not gonna do it.
The cold-blooded killer, who kept tight control of the evil within him for so many years, refuses to plead guilty. He insists he's innocent.
When Ted is going to trial, he realizes that he likely will never kill again. And he wants to maintain a position of power.
He's not in denial that he's done these crimes. He's just denying it to everyone else because he wants to maintain that image of, I'm charismatic, I'm accomplished. I want to see how far I can take this. I want to see how long I can do people. I want to stay in control.
By turning down the deal, Bundy sets the stage for a high-stakes gamble in front of a huge audience.
In June 1979, Ted Bundy went on trial for the murders at the Chi Omega house, and it was a media fiasco.
This is America's first nationally televised trial, with millions tuning in to learn Bundy's fate.
It's a spectacle. It's covered by 250 news outlets from 5 continents.
Bundy relishes the forum.
Ted had this trait. Ted would never look you in the eyes, and he would never look anybody in the eyes, unless it was a camera. And then he loved that. He loved the publicity.
With the whole world watching, Bundy trades his serial killer persona for his lawyer pedigree to represent himself.
He had other lawyers, but he needed to be the lead attorney because, he was in law school and he thinks he's smarter than everybody. The judge urges him against it, but says, I'm not going to take away your right to do it.
Certainly, I could get up here and examine every single witness for the defense. There's no question in my mind that I can do it.
By this time, Ted's name has become a household name. He's infamous. The murders are on newspapers all over the country. And he kind of uses this to his advantage. He wants to showboat as a chance to kind of make this all about him and make this a circus.
Maybe we're dealing with a problem of professional psychology, where attorneys are so jealous of the power they exercise in the courtroom, they're afraid to share it with the defendant. They're so insecure in their own skill and experience, they're afraid that anybody else might know as much as they do or can at least participate in the planning process.
Like he'd watched too many episodes of Perry Mason.
He was allowed to interview the witnesses. He would play this to the hilt. Ted Bundy in the courtroom, I would have to say, was where he wanted to be. As much as his life was on the line, the courtroom was his forum. He was in charge.
Good afternoon, citizens. My name is Ted Bundy, and I'm the defendant in the case, and I'm just here to introduce myself.
Everybody's eyes were on him. Everybody in the gallery. The people at the tables. The witnesses. The victims. The law enforcement officers. They all had to be quiet while Ted Bundy got to be who he wanted to be.
Ted calls a number of witnesses to the stand, including those who lived to tell the tale.
I had 5 skull fractures and multiple contusions in my head.
One thing that he did that was just flabbergasting was he had one of the officers who responded to the scene at Chi Omega describe all of the gory details of what they found in the room.
The side of her face looked like it had been literally crushed.
He looked like he was enjoying it. If you're defending somebody on a grisly murder, the last thing you want to talk about is the grisly details of the murder. You want to talk about something else entirely.
I think that these were ways for him to live in a fantasy world where his needs were getting met in different ways because he was not able to meet them anywhere else.
That fantasy is shattered when the prosecution calls Nita Neary, the Chi Omega sorority sister who saw Bundy fleeing the house the night of the attack.
And is that man in the courtroom today?
Yes, he is.
Would you point him out for us, please?
She saw a perfect profile of Bundy. And you can see the composite drawing that she did. Boy, they got that exactly right.
But the most damning piece of evidence is the one Bundy himself leaves on 20-year-old Chi Omega victim, Lisa Levy.
He left a bite mark, and it was a big double bite mark. It was as if he was leaving a signature.
That is a famous part of the trial where they enlarged the photograph of the bite mark that he left on his victim's buttocks. And they had experts come in and identify the impressions left by Ted's teeth.
And it was the bite marks at the trial that Pearson made by Dr. Souveron that made the difference.
Here's Ted in his three-piece suit. He's being charming, demure, but then they bring out this evidence that is showing exactly who he is. That was the monster, and he's trying to pretend that that person doesn't exist. And they bring out the evidence of the reality of Ted Bundy. Sort of a delicious irony.
I watched the court proceedings. I thought, oh my hell, he's been guilty all the time. People who knew him, who knew he was guilty, put it all together and said, wow, wonder how many.
The jury deliberates for just over 5 hours. On July 24th, 1979, they find Ted Bundy guilty of murder, attempted murder, and burglary. During his pre-sentencing hearing 4 days later, Bundy still professes his innocence and tries to convince Carol Durant she was kidnapped by someone else.
His technique was really to gaslight Carol about her own experience. I mean, she was there, she lived it, and she was so firm in what happened to her, and she didn't back down, and she was there to tell the truth, her truth, and she did.
It's the final nail in Bundy's coffin.
This court, independent of, but in agreement with, the advisory sentence rendered by the jury, does hereby impose the death penalty upon the defendant, Theodore Robert Bundy.
As you can imagine, the jury hates this guy.
Ted, of course, cannot believe this. He is innocent. He's never done anything wrong, but everyone is feeling very relieved and very happy that he's finally being held accountable.
I look back and say, what could have I done? How did I not know? How did I not feel? How did I not see that this guy was bad? If you have a friend and you support him, and then you find out he's actually a murderer, it turns your stomach. And that doesn't go away. I'm 73 and I still feel that way.
Ted Bundy confessed to 30 homicides, but law enforcement believes that number is way higher than that. And while he did confess to those murders, he never had remorse for them.
After a decade of exhausting his appeals, Bundy's time finally runs out.
A guard the night before he was executed said that he seemed somber, even bowed his head and cried at some point. He refused to eat his last meal. He called his mom twice. His mom was really the only one that was going to mourn his death.
The next day, on January 24th, 1989, Bundy is put to death in the electric chair.
So there's footage outside the prison where he's being executed, and it's this really, really dark celebration. They are chanting, they're singing.
Almost like a festival to celebrate that he was finally going to be off the face of this planet.
I can tell you that Theodore Bundy was executed at 7:16 this morning in the electric chair at Florida State Prison.
I hope I'm never as happy about the death of another human being as I was about the death of Ted Bundy. He had it coming, he needed it, and it was too long in coming.
I think the thing that stands out the most to me about Ted Bundy, especially given the time in which he was active, because we had Charles Manson, Ed Kemper, Gacy, Summer of Sam, it seemed like the entire nation had a really hard time accepting that this man was capable of these atrocities. Because, oh, he's this affluent guy. He's educated. He's well-spoken. Look how handsome he is. He's a law student. He's one of us.
Ted Bundy had a talent. He was able to manipulate people even when they knew he was guilty. And I think that that's why he's so memorable and scary.